lecture addresses the topic of language acquisition. In this presentation, you will learn more about the foundations and models of language acquisition. Our central question here is, what is language? We are going to use Picha Kucha, which is Japanese for chit-chat, a storytelling format modeled after show and tell. You probably already have an intuitive sense of what language is because it's a human behavior you have acquired to a sophisticated level and use regularly for various purposes. In fact, you are using your language abilities now. However, if you take a moment to define language more explicitly, you may find the task challenging. Ask 10 classmates for a definition of language, and each will likely respond differently. The same outcome would probably occur if you questioned 10 language researchers. On the next slides, I'll show an image for 3 seconds. Use the time to think about, write, or say aloud how the image can be used in your answer to the question, what is language? Then I'll provide an example of response. Language is an innate urge to express, communicate something that resides within all of us. Language is full of beauty and wonder. When we become immersed in it, we almost forget it's there. Language is change and movement. Its sands shift over time. It transports us to new places. Language is symbolic. Language is communicative and multidirectional. Language is generative. Language as communication requires both a sender and receiver. Language is creative. Language is shared. Language is conventional. There's a system of very specific rules that apply when using it. Language is made up of basic elements like phonemes and morphemes. Language is rule governed. Speakers follow patterns they are often not consciously aware of. Children internalize grammatical rules without explicit instruction. For example, a child might say, I goed to the store. This reflects the rule application of the ed morpheme, not confusion. Errors show learning in progress, not lack of knowledge. The language is arbitrary. There's no inherent reason that a word means what it does. The connection between sound, symbol, and meaning is socially agreed upon. Language is productive. Humans can produce and understand sentences they have never heard before. This cannot be explained by imitation alone. Language exists because humans communicate. Children learn language through interaction. Meaning is negotiated, not transmitted. In the optional readings by Freeman and Freeman, the authors highlight that learners acquire language by using language, not by studying it abstractly. Language is functional. It serves purposes like expressing ideas, telling stories, building relationships, participating in academic and professional communities. Language is one dimension of human behavior and consists of 3 interrelated domains: form, content, and use. Looking at all three helps us understand not just what children say, but how and why they communicate. Consider these utterances from a 3-year-old child. I beating you up the stairs. I won. I am so fast. These examples show how language develops across the three domains. Form refers to how language is structured. Although the child omits words and over-applies grammatical rules, their sentences follow clear patterns. These kind of so-called errors reflect active learning, not confusion. Content refers to meaning. The child's words work together to describe a race and its outcome. The language is concrete, focused on the here and now, and strongly supported by the immediate context. Use refers to how language serves social and personal purposes. In this case, the child is interacting with others and expressing excitement. Understanding use requires attention to context, such as shared activity and social cues, not just the words themselves. Together, these domains show that language is more than grammar. If language is a system for making meaning and children acquire it through use and interaction, then knowing a language involves more than producing correct sentences. This leads us to the concept of communicative competence, the ability to use language effectively and appropriately in real social situations. Communicative competence refers to the ability to use language appropriately and effectively in social contexts, encompassing not only the production of grammatically correct sentences, but also the ability to convey meaning effectively. Children must learn what to say, how to say it, when to say it, and to whom. But how do children acquire language? What motivates them to learn? These are questions that have challenged researchers in child language development for many years. Language acquisition is not a process of memorizing words, repeating what we hear, or being explicitly taught grammatical rules. If that were the case, young children would not be able to learn language as quickly and effectively as they do, often without any formal instruction at all. Instead, humans acquire language naturally, rapidly, and systematically. Across cultures and languages, children follow similar developmental patterns, even though the languages they learn may look and sound very different. Because this process is so efficient and so consistent, linguists study language acquisition to better understand how language develops, what role input and interaction play, and how these processes should inform teaching and intervention. Studying language acquisition helps us move beyond the question of what language looks like to the deeper question of how humans come to know and use it. However, there is no single explanation that fully accounts for how language is acquired. Instead, linguists have proposed several models of language acquisition, each emphasizing different aspects of the process, such as imitation, biological predispositions, cognitive development, social interaction, and information processing. In the next section, we'll examine these major language acquisition models and consider what each one helps us understand about how language learning happens. This slide and the 6 that follow present prevalent theories of language acquisition, detailing how each theory explains the phenomenon of language acquisition and discussing contributions and limitations of each theory. Although no one model can fully explain the wonder of language acquisition, the effort to describe how children acquire language has helped us better understand the learning process and how we can help build language and literacy skills in children with a wide range of support needs. Many people assume that children learn language primarily through imitation, that they hear adults speak and copy what they hear. This is a common sense explanation closely aligned with behavioral theory of language acquisition, most fully articulated by B.F. Skinner. According to behavioral theory, language is learned like any other behavior through imitation, reinforcement, and repetition. Children are viewed relatively passively as learners who imitate sounds they hear. Caregivers then respond by reinforcing, correcting, or ignoring these attempts. Over time, reinforced responses occur more often through successive approximation. Children's speech gradually comes to resemble adult language. Eventually, individual words are chained together to form sentences. There is some support for this theory. Caregivers do model language, and children often vocalize more when adults respond positively. Behavioral approaches have also been used successfully in structured interventions, particularly for children with significant language delays. However, the behavioral theory has important limitations. It cannot explain why children do not learn words simply based on frequency. For example, highly frequent words like the and a rarely appear in early speech. Second, the theory struggles to explain novel utterances, such as goad or woman's, which children produce even though they've never heard these forms. These errors reflect rule learning, not imitation. Third, research shows that parents tend to respond to the meaning of children's utterances rather than correcting grammar. Additionally, children often understand language before they can produce it, which behavioral theory cannot fully explain. Despite these limitations, behavioral theory remains valuable. It highlights the importance of interaction and caregiver involvement. It has influenced later theories and continues to inform certain intervention approaches. The nativist or syntactic theory of language acquisition was developed by Noam Chomsky in response to behavioral explanations of language learning. Chomsky argued that imitation and reinforcement alone could not account for how children acquire language. He pointed to several key observations. First, young children know far more about language than they could reasonably have learned through memorization alone. The amount of linguistic input they receive is limited, yet by age 4 they can produce and understand complex sentences. Second, language is universal. Children across cultures acquire language in similar stages, and language appears to be unique to humans. Third, children produce rule-based errors, such as goad, which shows that they are actively constructing grammatical rules rather than copying what they hear. Based on these observations, Chomsky posed that language is innate, biologically built into the human brain. He suggested that children are born with a language acquisition device, LAD, a mental system, black box, containing basic grammatical principles shared across languages. According to this view, exposure to language input triggers the LAD, which allows children to discover the underlying rules of their language without explicit instruction. The nativist theory helps explain the speed, uniformity, and rule-governed nature of language acquisition. However, it has important limitations. It minimizes the role of input and interaction, even though research shows caregivers actively shape children's language through modeling and responsive interaction. The theory also focused primarily on syntax or grammar, offering limited explanations for how children acquire meaning, sound patterns, or pragmatic skills. Finally, a strictly biological view raises concerns for intervention, since we know that language abilities can be supported and improved through teaching and experience. The semantic cognitive model of language acquisition emphasizes that meaning and thought come before grammar. This perspective grew out of observations by researchers such as Bloom. For example, Bloom documented a child who used the utterance mommy sock in different contexts, one to indicate possession and another time to make a request. Although the form stayed the same, the meaning changed. From this, Bloom argued that children are not simply learning sentence structures, they're using language to express meanings they already understand. In this view, semantics, or meaning, precedes syntax or grammar. The idea aligns with work by Charles Fillmore, who showed that word choice in sentences is driven by meaning, not just grammatical rules. And with Piaget's theory that language development follows cognitive development, Piaget proposed that children must first develop certain cognitive concepts, such as object permanence, before language can emerge. Together, these ideas suggest that children talk because they have something to talk about. As their experiences and understanding of the world grows, the language develops to meet those communicative needs. This model helps explain why children across environments talk about similar kinds of things early on. However, the semantic cognitive model downplays the role of language input and interaction. And current research suggests that language and cognitive development occur together, influencing one another. Like other models, it offers important insights, but does not fully explain language acquisition on its own. The social interactionist model of language acquisition is based on a simple idea. People use language to communicate. From this perspective, children learn language as they learn how to express their communicative intentions. Communication comes first. Linguistic structure develops through use. The model emerged from research on pragmatics, or how language is used, and parent-child interaction. Caregivers naturally adjust their speech when talking to young children, creating predictable routines and highlighting important features of language. These interactions provide scaffolding, helping children learn that language is meaningful and effective. Through repeated social exchanges, children begin to pick up patterns of sounds, words, and sentence structure. Usage-based theorists argue that language forms emerge from interaction itself, rather than from imitation or instruction. Perhaps it's not possible to completely account for the phenomenon of language development. Although such a conclusion may seem discouraging, it may be that what is important is the search for answers itself. As a result of this search, our ideas about language have been clarified, and the debate about language learning has been sharpened. Additionally, the search for answers has led to the development of language intervention methods. Understanding the language models gave us a framework for interpreting children's language. Now we'll apply that framework to the stages of language development from birth through age 5. There's wide variation in what we consider typical language development. Children develop language at different rates and in different ways, and the age ranges reflect averages rather than fixed expectations. Understanding these patterns is important for both recognizing typical development and for identifying when early intervention might be needed. Early research once viewed infants as blank slates. Even before they produce words, infants are active participants in communication and are developing the foundations for language. Newborns can discriminate between speech sounds and even show preferences for the language they hear in their environment. They attend more closely to child-directed speech and respond to human voices from birth. From the earliest weeks, infants engage in social interaction through eye gaze, facial expression, body movement, turn-taking during routines like feeding. Vocalizations begin as reflexive sounds and then progress to cooing and babbling as infants gain control over their vocal system. Caregivers respond to these sounds as meaningful, helping infants learn the basic rules of interaction long before words emerge. These early experiences lay the groundwork for later language development. Between 6 and 12 months, infants show major changes in communication. Early on, babies rely on caregivers to interpret their behaviors, a period known as the perlocutionary stage, when parents treat sounds and movements as meaningful communication. Around 7 to 10 months, infants begin to communicate intentionally, entering the elocutionary stage. They follow caregivers with their eyes, respond to gestures like waving bye-bye, and show distress when caregivers leave. A key development during this time is joint attention, when a child and caregiver focus on the same object or activity. Through joint attention, caregivers label objects, respond to the child's interests, which supports vocabulary growth and later language development. Between 8 and 12 months, children enter the elocutionary stage of communication. During this stage, children are not yet using words consistently, but when they are communicating intentionally, their gestures, eye gaze, vocalizations are purposeful and are directed toward others. The key feature of the elocutionary stage is that communication is driven by intent, even without spoken language. Within this stage, Elizabeth Bates identified 2 important types of early communicative function: proto-imperative and proto-declarative. A proto-imperative occurs when a child uses a gesture, such as pointing or reaching, to get something or to influence another person's actions. By contrast, proto-declarative occurs when a child gestures simply to share attention or interest, such as pointing to an object to say, "Look at that." These early gestures are important because they lay the groundwork for later spoken language. As children typically approach 10 to 15 months, they begin transitioning into the locutionary stage, combining gestures with vocalizations that gradually become recognizable words. From the beginning, children and adults are engaged in communicative interaction. Babies are active participants using gaze, movement, vocalizations to gain attention and prompt responses. Caregivers respond by adjusting their language to match the child's developmental level. By around 9 months, even before spoken words emerge, infants can express a wide range of communicative intentions, including requesting, rejecting, demanding. At the same time, infants' vocalizations are becoming more sophisticated. Babbling begins to resemble adult speech, with repeated consonant vowel patterns like ba, ba, and intonation that sounds like questioning or demanding. These vocal patterns reflect growing control over speech sounds. Importantly, receptive language develops ahead of expressive language. Infants understand far more than they can say, a fact confirmed by research showing that children comprehend language structures before they can produce them. By 12 months, children are ready to produce their first words, having already built strong foundations in communication, comprehension, and sound. Language development in the first 12 months, we have to recognize the relationship between language and communication. There is communicative intent behind the interactions between the infant and caregiver. For example, adults know that the child does not understand, but act as though the infant does. The infant's reactions influence how the adult responds. Markers of this communication are visible through gestures, pointing, eye gaze, vocalizations, and persistent attempts to communicate. Life language learning accelerates dramatically. Early on, children may learn about one new word per week, but this quickly increases to one new word per day. Across the first 5 years of life, children learn words at an astonishing rate, approximately one new word every 2 waking hours. As children begin combining words, their first utterances are typically 2-word combinations. These early phrases are made up of content words, such as nouns, verbs, and adjectives, which carry meaning. At this stage, children generally do not use function words like articles, prepositions, pronouns, auxiliaries, or verb endings. These grammatical elements emerge later as children's language becomes more complex. As children begin combining words, they often produce what is known as telegraphic speech. This type of speech resembles old telegrams or instant messages because it includes mostly content words and few, if any, function words. Children focus on the most important parts of speech, who or what is happening, rather than grammatical details like verb endings or articles. Telegraphic speech can sound similar to what happens when you're learning a new language. You communicate the core meaning first and add grammatical markers later. Examples include me outside, baby cry. These utterances show that children are already organizing meaning even though their grammar is still developing. Language typically emerges between 12 and 26 months, and it follows fairly predictable patterns. Early vocabularies are dominated by mid-level nouns, which make up about 65% of a child's early lexicon. These are words like dog, not too specific, like dachshund, and not too general, like animal. After nouns, children commonly learn action words such as go or eat, followed by modifiers like hot or cold. Between 27 and 30 months, children's utterances become longer and more complex as grammatical morphemes begin to emerge. These include prefixes, suffixes, and prepositions, small units that add meaning when attached to words. Roger Brown's research showed that these morphemes tend to appear in a predictable sequence with forms like ing, ing, and simple prepositions emerging early. At first, children use these forms inconsistently and make errors, but over time their use becomes more accurate, and pronouns like I and my begin to appear regularly. In his landmark study of early language development, Roger Brown closely documented the language growth of 3 children, Adam, Eve, and Sarah. His work was published in A First Language. One of Brown's key contributions was showing the mean length of utterance, or MLU. It's a better indicator of syntactic development than age alone. MLU is calculated by dividing the total number of morphemes by the number of utterances in a language sample. While MLU and Brown's morphemes findings should not be used as rigid checklists or diagnostic tools, they remain useful for describing grammatical growth over time, for setting flexible goals, and for supporting progress monitoring when paired with language samples. Here's an example of 10 utterances in written form. We can calculate the MLU from this language sample by counting the total number of morphemes and dividing by the 10 utterances. The first utterance is numbered 1. The boy's sock was white. There are 6 morphemes in that utterance. The, boy, the apostrophe S possessive marker is its own morpheme, sock, was, and white. For the second utterance, I walked to school. I is its own meaningful unit. Walk is its own meaningful unit. The ED verb conjugation carries its own meaning, signifying that it's past tense. To, the preposition, is its own morpheme, and school is its own morpheme. So we have 5 morphemes in sentence 2. You can look at the color changes that show the morphemes in sentences 3 through 8, and then try your own counting morphemes to see how many total morphemes you get. And then divide by 10, and you'll have the MLU, which roughly corresponds with age, where a 3-year-old would have an MLU of 3.0, and a 5.5-year-old would likely have an MLU of 5.5. Again, these are just one piece of information to include in painting a picture of all of a child's communicative competence. Things like caregiver input, language sampling through observation would also be helpful to complement any information related to MLU.